greetings, creeps, and welcome to HorrorGirl Problems, the podcast/videocast. Thanks for listening, Mom and Nephew Noah. Happy Thanksgiving! Today is our very spooktacular Thanksgiving fest. We are joined by Scored to Death author J. Blake Fichera, talking Scored to Death, the upcoming Scored to Death 2, and partaking in a very special Thanksgiving treat. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Ooh, you sound good.
I don't mess around.
That is Chris. You're not fucking around at all. All right. I am actually scared. Are you? Do you have your supplies?
To eat this candy?
So when these disgusting little babies came out, you sent this to me, and I promised that if I got my hands on some, we would try them together.
Yes.
And get my hands
you
on
came
them.
through.
I did. Am I regretting it horribly now? Yes.
But you love candy corn.
I love candy corn. This is an abomination and a bastardization.
Well, we haven't tasted it yet. You can't say that.
Oh, okay. Like, confession though. Have you ever done the Harry Potter jelly beans?
No, but I know what you're talking about.
You know of them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very sensitive to smells and tastes, and I was the kid who would like get in trouble when my mom would give me like Tylenol because I would just be throwing it back up onto myself because it tasted bad. So that's kind of what I do with those gross jelly beans if I ever get a
So you might throw up on the show right now.
And I'm going to edit that out. There you go.
Oh, damn.
Any gagging.
I would have been honored to be on the episode where you threw up.
Well, you'll get to see it live. And no one else will ever see it because I will light my computer on fire after we're done recording. Okay, so let's see. We have green beans, roasted turkey, cranberry sauce, ginger glazed carrots. That's getting pretty fancy. Sweet potato pie and stuffing.
Yeah, I have the bag, but I have emptied some out into a vintage Kellogg's Tony the Tiger bowl.
It's got to be Tony the Tiger.
And I'm trying to. A lot of them look the same. So
they do. I'm guessing this is green beans.
Yeah, well, that's. I hope so. I hope that's the green beans.
Oh fuck, that's the turkey, and it's gone horribly bad.
I only have like 2 cranberries in the whole bag. So
I did not.
They're staying true to the portion size that people eat.
Do I not have? Oh, I see one. It's way at the bottom. I have to touch. It's very COVID friendly. I'm just touching every single candy corn in the bag. Okay. I have a green bean. I have a cranberry.
And then it starts to get a little.
And then they all
confusing.
Look kind of the same.
There's a yellow one. Well, we have to play the guessing game. We'll have to decide what it might be.
I'm trying to grab one of each so I don't have to eat more than one of something disgusting.
There's like a yellow one with a brown bottom, or like a brown point.
That sounds attractive. Okay.
There's one with a white flat side and a brownish orange point. There's one with a white point and an orange top. And then there's one with an orange, fat piece and a lighter orange point. I think that's 6. There's 6 colors or 6 flavors.
6 flavors. Orange fat piece is a good name for a band. Keep that on the back.
Orange fat piece. That's what I call my base.
Orange fat piece.
Yeah.
I approve of this. These are different, right?
Yeah, they have to be.
Okay.
Or else they're just being cruel if they're not.
I have 5. I'm missing one. Oh wait, I think this was the one I was missing. It looks like kind of gravy on the tip or something.
That one? Gravy on the tip?
Gravy on the tip. Orange fat piece and gravy on the tip. That's our duo project. I'm gonna be orange fat piece though, obviously.
Okay.
Dibs. Okay, which one do you want to try first? Yeah, maybe let's try the green beans because then we know we're trying the same one together.
Definitely trying a green bean.
Okay. Wait, are you taking a bite or putting the whole thing?
I'm going.
Oh fuck. Okay.
I got a big mouth, so I gotta.
Okay.
I'm not gonna taste it if I don't. All right, here we go.
It tastes vegetable-y, all right.
There is definitely a greenness to it.
In a place where you don't want to taste greenness. It's something else. There's like a familiar like base taste in there, and it's not green bean. It's something else.
Some wax, I think.
Is that wax? I'm detecting a slight hint of, oh yes, wax. That's it. Tastes like grainy or something.
I'm kind of impressed though that it does. And not if you were like, here, taste this. What does this taste like? I'd be like, oh, green beans. But
right.
I would be like, I don't know, vegetable-y. There is something.
Yeah. Like if you just handed that to me, I'd be like, that's an odd tasting candy choice you just handed me. Okay. I have brown tip.
Brown tip.
And I have brown tip with like orange in the middle. White tip.
Let's go white tip. White tip orange.
White tip orange fat piece. Okay.
All right.
This one's gonna fuck with my head because this looks the most like a normal candy corn.
It's the corn flavored, and it'll.
Okay.
Is there a corn flavored? I don't know.
There's no corn flavor.
Damn.
I still have green bean on my tooth, so this is gonna be okay.
Well, you're mixing.
Maybe the ginger carrot.
Just looks like a cinnamony-ness to it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the sweet potato pie.
Maybe sweet potato pie.
Or ginger carrot. That's my guess.
It's a toss-up between those two.
We'll have to find the other one to find out.
I actually don't mind this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of sweet. Like I said, it's kind of cinnamony. Mm-hmm. It's like a little Big Red action.
A little Big Red. Oh, I miss that jingle. Water isn't enough for me. I have so many flavors just like swimming in my mouth right now. Okay.
Flavor sensation.
It's an explosion of flavors. These might be the same one. I can't tell. Do you have one that is like looks quite brown on the top?
Brown with the yellow.
With like a white butt?
White butt, brown with a white butt.
Brown with a white butt.
All right.
Okay, here we go. I don't want to go. God.
I think we found the turkey.
That's turkey. Oh, wow.
That's really unpleasant.
I thought I was going to have to spit it out, but I'm doing it. It's happening. It's still there.
You muscled through?
I muscled through as I just start crying. Okay. Yeah, I want that out of my face now. It's not that it's disgusting, but it is disgusting, if that makes sense.
All right. I'm guessing that's the turkey, right?
Yeah, I'm going to say yeah. It was like a very predominantly like gravy flavor, but gravy in the texture of candy corn is just not
that
not a
waxy chew. Should we do cranberry to
yes, please
knock that out? Because that seems like it's probably
it's lingering very. It's potent. It's in my mouth very bad. Okay, cranberry.
All right.
Save me with this. It just tastes fruity, sweet.
Yeah.
Mixed with the weird gravy.
That's why they only give you 2 of them in the whole bag.
Like,
we don't want you to get comfortable with this bag.
We save this for our real candy. This is expensive flavoring. Okay, what am I missing? Yellow bottom? Did we do that?
Yellow bottom, brown tip.
Brown tip? I think that's yellow bottom.
What do you think this one is? This has got to be stuffing, maybe?
I'm going to go with stuffing. Turkey, cranberry. Yeah, I'm thinking this is stuffing.
All right, stuffing.
I don't want to say goodbye to the cranberry. Okay.
Stuffing.
I don't like that. Okay, I hate spitting that one out. Okay. Get it. Power through it. Muscle through. Chew it.
I mean, smeared all over my tongue. Yeah.
Something very
I am kind of
unsettling.
impressed that they managed to kind of get a flavor that's recognizable, though, as something like stuffing or turkey.
You think they just threw a bunch of stuffing in a blender and then poured it into their candy mix?
Yeah, they distilled it.
Essence of stuffing. Yeah, that was yucky. Okay, what are we missing?
Well, then this is probably either the carrots or the sweet potato pie.
What does it look like? What do you have?
It's an orange fat piece, kind of like a lighter orange or tan tip.
Okay. With like an orange bottom also?
Yeah.
Okay. Almost one color and it kind of just is like a gradient.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I don't like this game.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Angel.
Happy Thanksgiving, Blake.
Thank you. That's it.
This is my Thanksgiving gift to you.
That's ginger carrot.
Oh, you really get the carrot in there.
You get a strong ginger. It's like ginger forward, and then as you,
it's ginger forward. Like I
got a carrot finish.
Chomped, and I was like, "Oh, hello, that's ginger." And then like a second bite, and then it was like, "And carrot, motherfucker." It tastes like drinking carrot juice, but
yeah,
chewing it, which I'm not a fan.
Except for getting it stuck in your teeth.
Yeah. So now I have this mix of just Thanksgiving layered all on my teeth.
Now we do one of each all at the same time.
I think that would probably actually make me puke. That turkey was bad enough. Turkey and stuffing. It's just something very unsettling about like that savoriness in like a candy form. Yeah. Because your brain is already like, okay, candy, it looks like a candy, it's candy texture, and then that like it's just a very unpleasant.
Like years ago, Doritos was making all these different flavors of Doritos, and they had this like black bag mystery flavor. And when you started eating it, you're like, oh, these are interesting. This is not bad. And then as you're eating it, you realize it tasted exactly like a McDonald's cheeseburger. And you're like, oh, that's weird. I like McDonald's cheeseburger. And then you realize that like a chip shouldn't taste like a McDonald's cheeseburger. And then you got kind of grossed out by it. This is kind of a similar.
Out. Meanwhile, it cuts to me and I just have the bag and I'm just pouring it into my McDonald's cheeseburger in chip form, you say.
That was something.
It was something. We had a time.
Oh, it was good talking to you. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, bye. Never see you again. Yeah, I would like to really just Listerine the shit out of my mouth right now. So you have a new book coming out, and I'm super excited for it. What is the official release date?
December 1st, I think, is the official release date. Hopefully I just got my first box of books, so hopefully there's also books going to Amazon and other places as well. So hopefully they'll have them in time for that release date.
Gotcha. Okay. So I think, hopefully.
It seemed like, when I did the first book, this book is a sequel to Scored to Death, Conversations with Some of Horror's Greatest Composers. When I did the first one, it seemed like there was this long wait between when I finished and when they came out. This one seems like it has been like I handed it in a long time ago, but it seems like it's been like this mad dash to getting it out, where it seems like last time things were happening earlier than the release date. Like a press release went out way beforehand, and the press release hasn't even gone out for this one yet. Okay. So it seems like everything's sneaking up on it. So I feel a little hesitant to be like, everything's going to be good in next week but it seems like it is. Okay.
So do you think that's does it have to do with just because it's a weird year and everything is kind of a little bit different right now? Or is it because it's your second one? Like, is there a reason?
I have no idea. I mean, I assume that, the coronavirus had something to do with it. I know my co-host on Saturday Movie Sleepovers, Dion, was also writing a book, and his was supposed to be out around this time too, but they actually pushed his book till next June, I think. Oh. And that had to do with I think it had to do with paper and getting the paper from China or Japan, and because like everything got shut down, so
Yeah.
there weren't workers making paper for a long time, and we actually almost were late with this one because the printers ran out of paper, and there was going to be like 2 weeks ago, my publisher's like, yeah, we're going to be a little late because the printers just don't have the paper
Shit. Okay.
that we ordered or that we want to use. And then I don't know, my publisher, he put the lien on them, made sure. I think they bumped another book and gave us their paper.
Oh, I just picture him going around with his baseball bat and he's like, listen up, all right? We need this paper and we need it by this date.
And if you knew him, it would be even weirder because he looks like Jerry Garcia, but he sounds like Wallace Shawn.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, that's the natural. That's actually exactly what I was picturing, though.
Yeah. Well, for anybody that doesn't know, the new book is called Score to Death, More Conversations with Some of Horror's Greatest Composers. And like the first book, it is a collection of interviews that I did with composers who have made significant contributions to the horror genre. And for the most part, it's pretty in-depth. In this new book, Charlie Clouser, who composed the music for Saw and or all the Saw movies, and also one of the Resident Evil movies. His was the longest single interview that I ever did. We talked for 4.5 hours.
Shit.
in one sitting. In the first book, I talked to composers for probably almost that long, but they were spread out over like 2 or 3 kind of sessions of talking. But Charlie and I just talked for 4.5 hours. He's a talker, which is good. But because he was willing to just go with it, we got, more in detail with some of the stuff than I do with some of the other composers, going by like almost every Saw movie and picking out cues and talking about, the thought process or how it was calling back to earlier scores. And then there are composers like Bear McCreary, who's probably like the hardest working composer working. He composes like, 6 television shows and 8 movies a year and all these things. And so he was really busy. So we only talked for about an hour. So it's kind of a variety of feels and lengths. And I interviewed 2 Japanese composers, Koji Endo and Kenji Kawai. And because they don't speak English, that was kind of done with me submitting questions. So those ones are much shorter. But I kind of like that about the first book and this new book, because I feel like it gives each interview its own identity, and you don't, so the fact that some are really short and some are longer, I just feel like it makes for a more entertaining read in a weird way.
Yeah, no, not weird at all, because then it's less like a template and more like a conversation, which is the really cool thing about this book, is that it reads like just a conversation. Yeah. And I think it's always cool when people who are masters of the craft talking about kind of like their process is always just kind of a fascinating thing anyway. And you're talking to basically living legends, like essentially, right? Like,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I had interviewed people before for other things, but the interviewing style that developed for these 2 books happened very quickly, maybe because Harry Manfredini was the first person I interviewed for the first book, and he's known best for his work on the Friday the 13th series. He was the first interview I did for the first book. And when I contacted him, he said, well, how long is it going to take? And I didn't know, because I hadn't interviewed anybody yet. I was like, I don't know, 45 minutes to an hour. And his response via email was just like, oh, I'm going to talk a lot longer than that. And I said, okay.
Okay.
And he's in California and I'm in New York. And I don't know, we ended up talking. It was really late for me. Like, it was like, we were talking at like midnight for me. And we talked for like 2 hours, 2.5 hours, something like that. And maybe just because of that interview, the rest of the interviews just kind of fell into the same kind of conversational approach. I didn't really have a very definite thing. I mean, I had questions, obviously, but and I ask a lot of the same, not a lot, but I do ask many the same question to everybody because they each have different approaches and different answers. But yeah, somehow the book, the first book and now this book ended up being conversational. I think that's why I kind of steered through that title of conversations with, because I don't know, to me they just felt more like conversations and less like interviews.
I think it also helps. You obviously love movies, but you also love music and you have a background in music and you are, is it a New York Blues Hall of Fame?
I am an inductee into the New York Blues Hall of Fame. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that also lends itself to being able to have it just more of like, it's like sitting down at a bar and having a conversation with somebody who has like, you have extensive knowledge of these two topics that are kind of married. And I feel like this was kind of the perfect book for you to write.
Yeah. The first book came about because obviously it was something I was interested in ever since my teens, when I fell in love with the music that John Carpenter made for his movies, and then 1819 discovering Dario Argento and the music of Goblin and Fulci and the music of Fabio Frizzi. That was kind of where like the obsession with horror music kind of started for me back in earlier for Carpenter, probably like 94, 95 for Carpenter, and then probably like 97, 98 for Goblin and Fabio Frizzi. And so it was obviously something I was passionate about and I was interested in, and I always listened to that music throughout the years, and I'd leave it and then I'd come back and listen to it again. And Claudio Simonetti, who was in Goblin, he had a band called Daimonia that I just absolutely loved in like 2000, 2001. And at that time, I live in New York and everything is public transportation. And so we're talking to like 2001, and I was behind the times. I didn't have an MP3 player. So I literally put like the Daimonia album, Dario Argento Tribute, on a cassette tape, side one. And on side two was Rock and Soul, the best of Hall & Oates, Hall & Oates' greatest hits. I figured on long train rides, bus rides, I'm covered no matter what mood I'm in right. with that combination. And I listened to that
obvious
tape.
Double feature though too, I mean.
And I listened to that tape every day on my way to work. I would travel 2.5 hours one way to get to work.
One way?
Yeah, so 5 hours of travel every day.
Jeez.
And I would listen to that tape nonstop. So I always loved that music. And then Goblin, actually a band called New Goblin, but they came to America as Goblin, which was part original Goblin members, part Simonetti's band Daimonia. They had kind of become New Goblin, but they toured here in the States as Goblin. And I went to that show and I was just like, I was so happy. Like I never thought I would see that. And literally, and I write about it in the beginning of the book. It's the preface of the book. And I was like looking around and I just saw that I wasn't the only one that was way into this.
Right.
And so it got me kind of obsessed with that music. And that was one of the things that made me want to find out more about Goblin and John Carpenter's music. And because I think most horror geeks or geeks in general, the fans can relate that like when you're really into something, you want to know everything there is to know about it. Mm-hmm. And so I went searching for that information. And when I couldn't find that information, I decided that I needed to find out that information for myself. And that's kind of how the journey of the first book started. And then the second book kind of, the preface of the second book also starts at a concert because the week the first book came out, or a couple, I think it was the week the first book that came out, John Carpenter was on tour and I saw him play here in New York. And when that show was done, I just decided that like I wasn't done talking to composers yet. Like I still was way too into it. And I had to wait. So I ended up squirted at the podcast, and eventually the new book did come to fruition, but it was like I didn't even get the green light for the second book until 2 years or over 2 years after I did the first one, or the first one came out. So that's why I started doing the podcast, was because, well, if there's not another book coming out, there's still people I want to talk to. So I started doing it as a podcast. And then through circumstances that are kind of convoluted and not worth going into, that kind of led to the current book, which is partially made up of interviews that originated from the podcast, but in all but one of those cases have updated information that's exclusive to the book. So it's like bonus material. And then the rest of the book, which is half, or actually more than half of the book, is all new stuff exclusive to just the book. So I didn't want to just have a book that was just stuff that people could get for free elsewhere.
Right. Smart. Well, so from the first book, it's basically you're starting from scratch. In the second book, you also had podcast material that you can, basically a library of interviews that you at least already started that you could go back and pull from.
Yeah.
Do you prefer one of those over the other? I feel like, I don't know, the podcast and being able to pull from that presents its own kind of new set of issues from what you were dealing with the first time around. But is there one that you would take over the other?
You mean from between starting completely from scratch or having things to pull from? I don't know. They're just a different experience, and there's just different questions that need to be answered as like the author or the editor or whoever. I say author because I don't know what else to say. I mean, like, I didn't write their interviews. I wrote the questions and I wrote the preface and the introduction.
You're the author of the
book. But yeah, it was the second book was weird. And part of the agreement for the second one on my part was that I would be able to use some of the stuff from the podcast, because I felt that the interviews for the podcast were really good. Part of the deal for the second book meant I got paid less. So if I wanted to have a second book, it meant I couldn't get the kind of advance that I got for the first book. And so I said, well, I would love to do it, but because I'm basically working for free now until the back end comes, until copies sell, can I use work that I've already done so that I don't have to, hopefully not cut the work in half, but at least cut the work in a third of the work is done already.
Smart. Yeah.
So that's kind of how that came about. It's different. The podcast is its own thing. And I was really pushing doing it. And it's very hard, especially as someone who, my day job is as an editor for television and things. And so as an editor, I find it very difficult to go listen to the raw material and not pull out every and awkward bit of silence. And so
it's also very weird editing yourself. It's a different kind of, aside from wanting to, you would probably pull out the ums and like pregnant pauses and things like that anyway. But I feel like when you're editing yourself, like it's even more like, oh, let me just cut a lot of this.
Yeah. Well, when you look at the timeline, it's, I'm half an inch of space on the timeline and they're, 12 inches across the whole thing. So they're talking a lot more, but I spend like a half an hour editing my, 30-second question.
Let me just add a little auto tune to that. But all you said was, I know, but I need to just tweak it a little bit.
There were even times when I first started doing it where I went and I re-recorded some questions.
I was
just like, I sound like a babbling idiot with this question. So yeah, it's just the editing. It's like, it just takes me a really long time. And the book obviously takes a really long time too, but it's just two different kinds of work. And but the podcast, to go kind of steer back to your actual question. I, interviews with like guys like Richard Band and Joseph LaDuca and the French composer Rob, who did the remake of Maniac, and Gretel and Hansel and stuff like that. I just thought they were really good interviews, and I was excited to have a place for them to live in a different way. When I do the stuff with the book, it's like I'm doing it for them. You know, it's not, there's not vanity for me in it. It's like I'm trying to bring awareness to these amazing artists and their work. And I feel like composers are as important to the filmmaking process as any of the jobs, but yet I think for a lot of people, they don't even think about it. So through getting to know these guys and gals and realizing that they're all amazing and generous people, it kind of, part of it became a mission of like, let's bring some awareness to these people because they deserve it. They deserve to be celebrated.
Yes. And it also goes back to what you were saying about when you're like a nerd for something or a geek for something, wanting to know all about these different aspects of it. And then when you set out to find that information, you couldn't find it. So you had to be the guy to write it down and put it out there and share with everybody. And I knew I was going to be interested in the material on the book just because it's, like I said, just reading about people who are masters of their craft talk about kind of their process and how they go through that. That's always interesting to me. But I was kind of surprised at like just how interesting I found it. Like I knew it was going to be enjoyable, but it was even like even more than I had originally fathomed. Like it's really just fascinating, and even asking similar questions or the same questions, and everybody's answers are so different. And then when there are similarities, like that's interesting too, of what the similarities are. Like it's a really cool topic.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because that was something I always really liked about the first book while I was editing it. Was like, I did think that when the answers are different, that's interesting. But I did also think it was really interesting when they're similar, when they have similar ways of approaching things, or they say similar things. Like to me, that was genuinely just as interesting to me. So I talked it over with my friend Dave, who is my soulmate when it comes to horror film music. But Dave was a kindred spirit with that. So I talked to Dave about it. I said, I don't know, I want to do this, and through talking to him, I decided it's like, I'll just do one or two and see how they come out. And if they don't come out great, then I'll see if some horror website wants to put them on their site as print. You know, in print, I'll transcribe them. They'll live somewhere, but I'll save myself from years of work if they stink. Assuming that most people were going to say no, I asked like 7 to 10 people right out of the gate.
To do your couple. Okay. All right.
Because I figured, like, you know, if I throw out 7 asks, maybe 2 of them will say yes, 2 or 3 of them will say yes. Well, of course they all said yes, thankfully. And then I was like, okay, I guess I'm writing this book now. So
that's another interesting thing. We've talked a little bit about it, but do you feel that your interview style, or just how you feel going into interviews with these composers, has changed from the first book to the second book because you've done it so many times now?
Yeah, I didn't think so until I started editing the interviews for the second book. Not even for the podcast, editing the podcast. It was when I started transcribing and editing the interviews for the second book that I kind of realized that they do feel very different than the first book. And it's weird because it's like a lot of the questions are the same. Some of them are different, and some of the questions I dropped for whatever reason. But it wasn't a conscious thing, and I didn't even realize it was happening until I did it. And I remember after when I handed the book, the book into the publisher, and then I got his notes back, his edit back, and he was like really not forthcoming with how he felt about it. Like I kept on waiting at some point to get an email while I was editing, be like, hey, you know, I'm up to this point in the book. Great job. Nothing. Not, you know, like I
Just
had no
radio
idea.
silence? That's torture. That's the worst possible thing you can do.
And even when I got his notes, there was no like, it was just like, here's my edit. There was no indication whether he liked it or not. So I said to him, I asked, let me ask you, like, do you like it? Like, what do you think of it? And he said, I like it a lot. And I said, oh, good. Thank God.
Good. Why didn't you say so?
And he said the interviews feel really different. And I said, yeah, I don't know why, but they do. He said he's like, not that you're old, not that the interviews in the first book were immature, but the interviews in this book feel more mature. And he said, like, you talk about your own music with them, which you didn't do in the first book, which I didn't even realize. Not even something that I realized when I was editing it, but I guess I do bring up the things, that I do musically and talk to them about that. And I kind of realized that not only was it the fact that just having had the experience of interviewing 14 people for the first book and just having like that, being more comfortable, and then going into the podcast, and just so other than just the experience of doing it, I realized that through doing the first book, I ended up becoming friends with some of these guys, like, and I still am. And when I'm out in California, like, I hang out socially with some of them, and because they're all, I haven't met a composer yet that's just like not one of the nicest people I've ever encountered, and they're all really generous. And 5 of them came out for the signing for the first book, and when I got a table at Monster Palooza one year, 2 of them came out and sat at the table with me to sign the book, and I mean, for free. They just did it, because they wanted to help support the book and me. And I realized that through becoming friends with them, going into the second book, I think on a subconscious level, I felt less like a fan and more like an equal in a weird way, because now, like, I've now spent a lot of time with these guys, and some of the guys in the first book were the ones that introduced me to some of the guys in the second book, and that's how I got some of those interviews. And having a mutual friends, I think, changed the dynamic of the interviews, because Joseph LaDuca, sometimes, especially when I did it in the podcast, I'd have to put like this disclaimer up front, like, when he's talking about Joe, he's talking about Joseph Fichera, because he knows that I'm friends with those guys, and so it was like unclear. And so in a way that altered the way I approached them, but also just altered the feel of it, because they knew I knew these other guys, and they knew that I had this other book. And so I think they also ended up approaching the interview differently. And I love that the second book feels very different than the first book. To me, like, that's a success.
That's awesome.
Like, I don't want them to feel the same. And so I'm really happy that they both feel pretty different.
You weren't just a random guy, but you also weren't just thinking of yourself as a random guy.
They're just all, I mean, so far, I haven't run into any composers that aren't great. And I think some of that comes from the work. When you're an artist and a master of your craft, and you're working for a project that's not your own, like, I don't feel like a composer who's an asshole and has a big ego about his stuff could survive in film music, because they're working for somebody else's project. Like, they're working for the film. So if they have an ego, I don't think they would want to do that work, because ultimately they're not doing it for themselves. They're not writing music because they want to hear that music. They're writing music to service a story.
And that's way too collaborative. You have you can have a director saying, that's not the feel that I'm going for. So it's
so I feel like there's a certain temperament that has to go along with that job, or else they wouldn't be good at it, or they would be miserable at it.
Right.
And so I think that's why so many of them, I mean, I've now interviewed, 40 or so composers between the podcast and the 2 books, and they've all just been amazing. And I think it's partially because they kind of have to be really kind and generous and without ego to function in that world.
So you've interviewed over probably 40. Is there anyone that's like super like a bucket list for you that you haven't gotten to talk to yet? Because I feel like you've probably talked, at least for like living composers, you've probably talked to most of the ones that were like your tops. Is there anyone that you're like missing still?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely ones that I would have loved to have talked to in the first book that ended up being in the second book, and there was ones that I would love to have talked to in the first book that just never came to fruition for either book. I would really love to talk to Howard Shore. I know he's the Lord of the Rings guy now, but David Cronenberg is one of my favorite composers. I mean, favorite directors. And so I would love to talk to Howard Shore. And unfortunately, he was not available to be in this book. And so maybe someday that'll happen. He's the big one. I mean, really. I mean, yeah, obviously, I would love to talk to John Williams, and I tried to sweeten the pot and be like, I am not going to ask you about Star Wars, Indiana Jones. People who have read the first book seem to really like the interview with Chris Young, because it's kind of raw in a way. Like he goes a lot into like his doubts of like, was this the right career path, or like maybe I should have done so many horror films because now I'm kind of pigeonholed as that guy. And part of the reason why I think that interview feels that way, and why Chris and I have stayed friends, for now 5-6 years, is because like I kind of called him on stuff. I kind of was like, yeah, but don't you think, and I don't think a lot of interviewers go that way. And I think because I talked to him and didn't let things that he said slide, not that he said anything bad, but just kind of like called him on stuff or pushed him on things and tried to, I think that's why that interview came out so honest. And I think that's what people connect to about that interview. So the act of interviewing is something that I've obviously been practicing for a long time. But even if I didn't do another Score to Death book, like I would want to do something similar, just in a different topic, because why I've enjoyed the 7 years that I've been doing this is because kind of like what you were saying is like, I'm just interested in what creative people have to say about what they do, and I love talking to them about it.
Right.
And sometimes it's like, when I do the podcast or I'm writing the book, the frustrating part is that it has to be for a podcast or the book. Because once I do once I have that conversation, like everything I wanted out of it, I've now fulfilled. Like, it's done. I wanted to know the information. Right. Now I know that information. What do I care if anybody else finds out that information?
No, now you have to go on and transcribe it and share it with the world.
Then that's when the work starts. And then that's the frustrating part, because like everything I wanted out of it, I already got out of it. I had that conversation. I learned it already.
That is the fun part. You get to do the fun part of it, and then you're like, oh shit, it's for work. It's a work thing now. I have to do the work portion. Now
I got to do all the crappy stuff about it. Basically, the way I approached the first book was I tried to, one, the first thing is like, who do I just want to talk to? And two, whose music, like what music do I like? Mm-hmm. And then the third thing, which was equal to those other things, was like, I wanted to create a diverse group of people, whether it was age or style, or ethnicity or whatever. Like I wanted to have a wide range of people. But the second book, ended up being kind of the deciding factor also. It was, all right, what group of people, one, are diverse from each other, but two, makes this book different than the first book. I was like, the first book is heavily weighted in guys whose career started in the 70s and 80s, with some more contemporary composers like Joseph Fichera and Nathan Barr and Jeff Grace. So the new book is slightly like the mirror image of that. It's like it's slightly more weighted in quote unquote contemporary composers with some guys who started their careers in the 70s and 80s. And so the new book became that. It was like, and then it was like, I would love to talk to a woman. There's no women. Both books are sausage fest so far. So thankfully, because of doing the first book and having, a Score to Death Twitter page and all those things, I've gotten to know other people that either podcast about music, film music, or just are fans. And so talking to them, I discovered the music of Holly Amber Church. And after I watched the films and listened to her music, I was like, yeah, she has to be in the book, because her music's great. And because Holly's hasn't really, the films Holly's done so far are kind of the contemporary independent horror movie. Whereas, Harry Manfredini and John Carpenter and all those guys were starting in the 70s and 80s contemporary independent horror movie. And so it was like, yeah, not only is her music great and unique, and she's a woman, so she's going to have a different perspective on the art and the industry, but she's also working on a type of film that nobody else in this book is working on. And then, it was great that Michael Abels is a guy who has spent his entire career and life in music, but now, like in his 50s or something, is now scoring movies. So it was really great to get to talk to somebody who has had this fantastic journey as an artist and a composer, and now is starting this like whole new chapter in his own story. And being Black, he also has a very different perspective on the industry. And it was really interesting to talk to him and Holly about how the film industry in general, but especially horror movies and especially horror movie composers, are like a white dude's club. And how do they fit into that? And do they feel that it not being that hinders their careers, or does it benefit their careers? And it was just really great to get to talk to.
It seems like a natural progression for the sequel too, because the first one, like you said, it's a lot of guys that started out like in the 70s, and they started out quite young. A lot of them, they're like early 20s, starting out in the 70s, and then built these just like monolith careers. So then for the second book to be a mixture of like contemporary and then people who came into it later, like had a career in music and had these amazing careers and then came into it later, or like being Black or being a woman, it's kind of like you said, the mirror of the first book. So it's kind of a new take on it, which is I'm really excited to read it.
And like the first book has a handful of Italian composers, and I was like, well, what's the other like not American field of horror, a region of horror that is like, has one, a fan base, two, I'm interested in. I've seen a bunch of the movies, that it was like, oh, like the Asian horror scene. So I got to talk to a couple of Japanese composers, the guys that work with Takashi Miike, and the guy that did the Japanese Ring, and so it was really, unfortunately, the language barrier, I didn't get the kind of information I wanted, but I feel really kind of excited and almost honored to be able to bring the information that I did get from them to American horror fans. Because in trying to find information so that I could interview them, I couldn't find any other, interviews with them. So it was
Japanese horror is pretty, like, to me, I think Japanese horror is just fucking scary. It's just like, and then we just ripped it off so hard, and it's still not even half as scary as the originals. And then book 3, you can do some Indonesian horror. I feel like that's been pretty big in the last couple of years, and that's pretty amazing stuff coming out.
Well, that's the thing. People are like, were there people you haven't talked to that you want to talk to? Do you think there's more? Is there enough people to talk to for another book? And I was like, I don't know if I'll do another book. I don't know if I want to do another book yet anyway. But yes, like I could fill 10 of these with amazing composers.
Well, new movies are coming out all the time. So even if it's like a composer that you've talked to, by the time you want to do another book, maybe they've done another couple of films that you want to talk about, or there's new films and new composers.
And that would be a completely different interview, because like a part 2 where we're not talking about why they do it or how they started in the business and why they fell in love with music. You can just cut right to the chase and just get to the new stuff, or cover some of the films
we don't need backstory. We covered that. Okay, let's cut to. Is there anything else you would like to share about the second book coming out?
I don't think so. It's called Scored to Death 2. More conversations with some of horror's greatest composers. And I'm excited that it happened, and I'm very proud of the way it came out, and I hope people like it. And for some of the reasons that we talked about earlier about the feeling, the way the interviews kind of feel different, and the evolution of the interviewing style, I think in those ways, I think it might even be better than the first book. Not because of the people I interviewed, they were great, but because of me.
Your interview style, your interviewing style.
Yes, and I'm
comfort level.
I'm excited for people to read it. I know some people have listened to the audio versions of some of those interviews, but I'm really glad that I got to talk to some of those guys about stuff that I didn't talk to them in the podcast. So there's a lot of more information in those interviews, and then there's just a collection of great people. I'm really lucky that not only that people are into the subject and are interested in reading a book like this, but I'm very lucky that I've been able to talk to so many amazing artists about what they do, and they've been willing to open up and talk about what they do with me. So I hope people enjoy it.
All right, now give me one more. I'm excited, but without the question mark and an exclamation point instead.
And I'm really excited.
There we go. That was more like a period, but I'll take it.
I'm really excited.
Hey,
Woo!
Third time's a charm. Yes. Woo! Right. I'm super excited for the book. December 1st. People can pre-order it on Amazon now, yes?
Yes. And at some point, I will have copies that you could order from me directly at scoredtodeath.com.
Ooh, give us a little flash. Let me see your shirt.
I don't know.
Yep, there it is. Yeah. Perfect. Okay, Scored to Death 2, December 1st. Makes an excellent Christmas, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah gift. Yes?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Okay,
you as well.
I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much to Blake for joining us today. Those Thanksgiving candy corns are disgusting. I really do love this book. It's a lot of fun, and it really is just fascinating to read masters of a craft talking about what they do in just such a conversational fashion. Scored to Death 2, pre-orders December 1st. You can also check out scoredtodeath.com for some of Blake's podcast interviews with composers and the Scored to Death panel from this year's Salem Horror Fest. Thank you for watching and listening. Super grateful for you creeps. You can email me at podcast@horrorgirlproblems.com. Find me on the blog, horrorgirlproblems.com, socials. And in light of Thanksgiving, I'd just like to say I'm super grateful for all of you for listening, watching, supporting. Genuinely means the world to me, so thank you. I'm grateful for you not just today, not just this week, but every day, every week. You make my little Franken heart swell with love. As always, thank you so much for listening. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate on Apple Podcasts if you're so inclined. That's all I got. I'll catch you next week for some more spooky shit.